Hi, everybody. I am Mark S. King, and I want to welcome you to Out on Film, everyone's favorite queer film festival, and one of our in conversations with one of a pair of directors for a documentary that I hope that you see called Pat Rocco Dared. And we're very excited to have with us Morris Chapdelaine and Bob Christie, the co-directors of Pat Rocco Dared. So first of all, hello to you both.
Hello, great to be here.
Hi,
Yes, welcome virtually to Atlanta. We welcome y'all.
thanks.
We'd
You're
rather be
very
there.
welcome. I want to say, first of all, that Pat Rocco Dared will be screening Sunday, September 25th at 9 p.m. at the Midtown Art Cinema. And then it will be available streaming the very next day on On Film, as will this Q&A. So I hope you're watching and that you've already seen the documentary or you're making plans to see it. I've watched this documentary. I was just saying to Morris, I watched it with the family over the weekend. What an amazing slice of life of a very particular time in queer history, and how amazing that you unearthed someone who was clearly a national treasure, but nobody knew it. And that is Pat Rocco, this filmmaker. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about what the film is, so people will know what we're talking about.
Okay, so I'll start. Actually, I'll go back a little bit and talk about how I met Pat. I actually met him at a film festival in Hawaii, maybe 12 years ago. And at that time, he was semi-retired, living with his partner of almost 40 years, and he was showing some of his old collection of films, a lot of stuff that was shot on Super 8 or 16 millimeter. And I was completely taken aback and excited and thrilled with what I was seeing. And I spoke to him after that, and I had Bob on the phone, and we said, "Your story is remarkable. You've created so much incredible work in the United States of America and traveled the world. How come we've not heard about you before?" And that's what triggered this whole thing. And it was a long process. Bob and I immediately, got to talking with him and figured, we really want to tell your life story. It needs to be shared in a much larger capacity. And eventually, he trusted us enough to tell his story. And so that's what this project is. It's really a story of him and his work, as a young gay man who came of age in a time
The
that was very
50s.
different in the world and in the United States, and started making these gorgeous, beautiful, sumptuous films in the late 60s and early 70s. And his story demanded to be told. So that's what this film will do.
And what he did, in fact, was in the 60s, I guess the late 60s, began a series of short films that were, I guess he didn't quite like the label. He certainly didn't like the label X-rated or even erotic. He said, I think he says some in the film somewhere that they are only sometimes erotic. Well, you show a lot of examples of his work in this documentary, and I think that across the board, they would be considered erotic, or at least achingly beautiful, and a subtext of sex, or the promise of sex, or the promise of sexual romance. Do I have that about right?
Well, romance is definitely, the Pat Rocco word, I think. That's where he was uh his film work is idealistic in many ways, and it was about the romance for him, I think. And that showing just positive gay male love in a way that wasn't being screened by anybody else.
And it is, there's all these shorts of these beautiful men who are usually naked or are going to be by the end of the film, but it is not anybody who is raised in the last 20 years, or it's going to have a completely different perception of what we're talking about, because they're raised on gay porn as we know it today, as opposed to the romanticism and innocence of, because there are no hard-ons. These are men who are cavorting about and are involved in some sort of intimacy, um, and it's just the most innocent thing. It's the most innocent, beautiful thing. Although there's also, like, oh boy, I know where this is leading. You may not be showing it to me, but I know exactly where it's going, right?
Yeah, it really is. We've been traveling with this film really for the last 6 months, going to as many festivals as COVID would allow. That's opening up even more now, so we're excited. But we've heard, from different people, that well, it's titillating, or as you said, achingly beautiful, and they are, because he's captured this um, reality that didn't exist for gay men at the time, except in the confines of their homes in privacy. And he sort of breaks through that wall and allows young gay men to frolic in a park, or maybe meet at Disneyland and have a fun little sexual rendezvous behind, Magic Mountain.
Mhm.
So it's stuff that was sort of, it was fantasy, and as you said, sort of innocent,
Mhm.
but it really does showcase a world where, almost anything could go and there was no repercussions for it, in a sense.
I'm sure our listeners are seeing us struggle to find the right words to describe something that you really have to see. You need to see this documentary to understand, kind of the milieu that we're talking about, and just it's something that I was struck by when I was watching his short films. And you're very generous throughout your documentary of showing much of his work, is the fact that these relationships, the scenes you're seeing between these men. What struck me is it's almost as if they are without consequence. And by that I mean without negative consequence. The cops don't barge in, homophobic neighbors don't give them any hell. It's just the two of them enjoy, not to mention AIDS, of course, right? Because this is pre-AIDS. A lot of us were brought up, came of age in the age of AIDS. There's no, there's no negative consequence. It is distilled. It's a distillation of love between men.
Completely.
Am I was I overly flowery about that? But that's the way it
I
made me
love it.
feel.
I love that you said that. And I mean, Bob expressed the same thing. And Bob also worked as, director, producer, and editor. So he carefully spent a lot of time with UCLA Film Archives, who was a big part of this project, taking Pat's work and weaving it in to our story, and how we sort of approached it with Charlie David as our protagonist, meeting Pat, and talking about both being filmmakers, and how Charlie was influenced, even though he didn't realize it immediately, so much by Pat's work and body of work.
Bob, how did you possibly choose amongst all of those? There's a shot in the movie of his gargantuan closet, vault filled with films. How did you possibly choose what to include?
Yeah, it was hard for sure. And actually, many of the films that we include, obviously, we're only showing excerpts of. So even like
Mhm.
paring down some of these beautiful, beautiful works into something manageable within the film we were making was really tough as well. We kind of just we really focused in on a certain period in Pat's life with the documentary. So we focused on that time when he just started releasing those films until he finished, with his activism in the early 80s. So it's really a 20-year span there at the most, if that we focused on. So there were some later films that were features that we didn't include, and we just kind of kept it to the ones that we knew that Pat loved to screen and that had a bit of a story behind them. And of course, the ones that had already been restored at the UCLA archives were like the first go-tos. But there was important documentaries in there as well as the gay films, and we felt it was equally important to share
Oh,
those.
absolutely. They're talk about multifaceted. I have to say one thing more about the erotic part, and then we'll move on. But there is a particular clip, the Naked Cowboy. You probably hear this all the time, and anyone who's watched the documentary, and if you haven't, go see it. And it's just this luscious slow of the camera just kind of adoring this cowboy reclining, and every little blonde hair on his body is glistening in the light, and it's really lovely. Playgirl could not have done better. And as it moves up to his face and he kind of tilts his cowboy hat, he looks right at the camera and winks.
Yeah.
And I laughed out loud. I laughed and I still had a tingle, but I laughed out loud, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever had that response to something so sexy before.
We get a lot of laughter at the film, and it's what the audiences are I mean, usually a lot of gay men, but lots of women. And the women are loving the story of Pat Rocco. They're loving these erotic, playful tales of young men sort of having pillow fights, or, the reclining cowboy. And the very first time we screened it, when we did our world premiere at the Whistler Film Festival, for us, it was fascinating to hear all these female voices laughing with the men, or, oohing and awing at the same thing. So that, for us as filmmakers, felt really good, because we didn't make it just for, a
Right.
particular demographic of gay film watchers. So.
You alluded to his kind of his documentary work. He was there on the scene, camera in hand, for so much of emerging queer culture and celebration in Los Angeles. He was on the board of Christopher Street West when they did their very first march parade. He wanted it to be a parade in Los Angeles. And there he is documenting Harvey Milk on a float, and Marsha P. Mason, and Marsha P. Johnson, and on the scene, with there's so many other icons that kind of cross paths with him. You have Troy Perry in the movie, the founder of Metropolitan Community Church, Morris Kite, who founded many things in Los Angeles, among them Radical Fairies. Troy and Morris were people that I kind of just intersected with during my time. I went to LA in 1980, so like late in Pat Rocco's kind of like documentary life. Troy was around. He blessed my house. Morris was around, kind of holding court at the queer events, and to see them in the film, and then to start scanning the crowds at these large events to see who else might be there. He captured so much history. Did you know? I'm wondering if you're aware of this, that in the short film that's included in your documentary, I think it's called Secret No More. Is that right? It's
Silent No More.
Silent No More.
Right.
Yes, it's a short film about a young man and his boyfriend who decide to stand up to their parents and talk his father into going to attend Gay Pride. And so he kind of mixes in this documentary footage of Gay Pride with did you know who plays the son in that short film?
Do you?
It's Michael Kearns. And Michael Kearns was the first officially out gay actor in Hollywood. He played John Boy's high school college roommate in the premiere, the pilot for The Waltons, and he came out militantly as a gay man. He lost a lot of work as a result, and he became kind of like the go-to gay actor, playing a lot of gay parts and people with AIDS and all of that through, and it has a very, very illustrious career in especially Los Angeles theater. So even without knowing it, you keep intersecting with all of these iconic people, these iconic queer cultural people in Los Angeles through your movie.
That's amazing. I had no idea. Is Michael still alive? Is he still?
He is. He is still alive. He's still working Los Angeles. I actually messaged him and said, "Guess what? I just saw you when you were 20 years old." In this film. I haven't gotten a message back from him yet, but he'll be really excited to know that, I think, and to know, I'm sure that Pat's work continues. So a couple of other issues is I was very impressed with how Pat handled gender identity. Transsexuals was the parlance of the time. Of course, we know them as transgender people today, and yet he was very empathetic and sweet about doing short films with people who were gender nonconforming or having gender transitions of some sort, and I was really impressed by that.
That was so important to us, and it was from the beginning, from the get-go. It was more about not than his erotic films, the documentary work, and how he was capturing the community. And the film that you're talking about, what's it called again?
Changes.
Sorry, and he wrote the original music for it. It's Pat singing. It had such an impact on people that have watched it while we've been on this festival, because I think, how come we didn't know about this? It would have been so remarkable for us to have been able to see this person living, you know, what they were hoping would be their life on celluloid for us to see as a young person growing up. These were so few and far between. And you're right, he did handle it with such a grace. And it's a really wonderful little bit of history.
I think he was ahead of his time. I mean, he was certainly ahead of his time, just in terms of how he viewed them with such compassion, you know, and it's so clear in his filmmaking. I really, really appreciated that. You know, during the course of your film, no spoilers, don't mean to provide a spoiler here, but Pat passed away at some point during the production of your film, because you do have footage after his passing. Obviously, I can't imagine that was exactly planned, but it's how fortunate, I guess, that you were able to capture such important interviews with him and with his partner after his passing, while you could, while he was with us.
Yeah, it was important to us. And it did take a long time for us to do. As anyone knows, there's probably other filmmakers watching this and attending your festival. Documentary is a tough medium to work in. You don't often have, you know, a bucket of cash. And Bob and I and Charlie and our other wonderful camera person and editor, Nico, you know, worked with Pat and David when they were available to us. We set up a few different meetings in San Francisco. We brought them up to Vancouver. Then, of course, spent a wonderful long weekend with them in Hawaii. But you know, he was older, and it was difficult for him to travel. And yeah, we knew we had to utilize the time that we had, and it's sad that we lost him before we were completed. He was never able to see the final project. But
and here a man who did so much to kind of progress what we saw as, or Pat Rocco dared to present eroticism, or at least something very close to it, on film, while at the same time enjoying what became over 45-year marriage to his partner. A romantic through and through.
100%.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody that this film, Pat Rocco Dared, will be streaming at the Untitled Cinema on Sunday, September 25th at 9 p.m. and then will be available on the Out on Film website the next day. You have been watching In Conversation, a series of occasional Q&As with wonderful directors like Bob and Morris here with Pat Rocco Dared. The two of you, I know what a labor of love this clearly was. I want to celebrate you for your the intersection of art and activism, which this clearly is, and your accomplishment in bringing Pat Rocco back to life for us to enjoy. Thank you
so much.
Thank you. That's great.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Morris.